Hello, this is Mark Grier, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the June 11th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, first article. Analysis of satellite image and videos suggests precision U.S. strikes on Iranian water facility. It is unclear if the U.S. intentionally struck the facility or knew what it was. Deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure could constitute a war crime. Strikes early Wednesday destroyed what appears to be a drinking water facility on Iran's southern coast near the Strait of Hormuz, according to an analysis by the New York Times. Around the time of the strikes, the U.S. Central Command said on a post on X that it had conducted attacks near the strait with precision munitions from U.S. Air Force and Navy fighter jets. Iranian state media reported that the U.S. had hit water storage buildings, and a local official said that water was cut off to more than 20,000 people living in a town and villages nearby. Temperatures in the area have reached above 100 degrees Fahrenheit this week. A commercial satellite image from the morning of June 9th shows two small water structures in the village of Bimani. Both have light blue pipes, typical for water distribution infrastructure, as is their location, on a hill outside of a populated area. The buildings are consistent with the description of the two storage tanks that the head of the Provincial Water Authority said were destroyed. It is unclear if the U.S. intentionally struck the water facilities or knew what was in the buildings. Deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure could constitute a war crime under international law. Videos released on Wednesday by Iranian media outlets, including state media, and the Provincial Water Authority show that the roof of the smaller building collapsed. The larger facility next to it still stands, but images show that it has a small impact hole in the center of the roof. The Times confirmed the images of the structure by matching the visible surroundings to reference imagery of the site. A photo of fragments that Tasnim, the semi-official Iranian news agency, said were recovered from the site showed remnants identified as a GBU-39 bomb by researchers with the open-source munitions portal, a database of weapon fragments documented in conflict zones. The CBU-39, a small precision-guided glide bomb in the 250-pound class, is consistent with the damage shown in the footage of the damaged building. A clean hole punched through the building's roof and limited blast damage around it. But buildings standing outside the village, and there is no other infrastructure in the immediate vicinity. Hitting remote buildings and striking the center of a roof are considered likely indicators of a precision strike. In a text message, a Central Command spokesman said he was aware of the reports of damage at the facility, but did not provide further information. Mr. Hazen Power, the Provincial Water Authority leader, said that mobile water tankers had brought in water to supply residents, while crews built a new service line that bypassed the damaged tanks, a task he said had been accomplished within 12 hours. Okay, moving on, next article. Europe raises interest rates as war stokes inflation. The European Central Bank raised interest rates for the first time since 2023. It expects inflation to run hotter than previously thought and downgraded its forecast for economic growth. The European Central Bank raised interest rates on Thursday, becoming the first major central bank to act to rein in rising inflation set off by the war in the Middle East. Policymakers who set rates for the 21 countries that use the euro lifted their key rate by a quarter of a point to 2.25%. It was the central bank's first increase since September of 23. Officials cut rates 8 times in 2024 and 2025. Thursday's move was an effort to counter the economic fallout of the war, which has closed the Strait of Hormuz, a critical waterway for energy and other commodities off Iran's southern coast, for more than 3 months. In May, the inflation rate in the Eurozone was 3.2%, driven by higher energy prices and well above the central bank's target of 2%. Before the war, the inflation rate was just below 2%. The war in the Middle East is generating inflation pressures, officials said in a statement, as the bank also raised its projections for price growth this year and next. It also lowered its economic growth forecasts. Higher prices for energy, fertilizer, and other goods that are exported from the Persian Gulf through the Strait are pushing up inflation worldwide. Those rising costs are weighing on economic growth, leaving central bankers to balance the risk of higher inflation against those of a slowdown. So far, central banks in several other countries, including South Africa, Australia, and Norway, have raised rates since the war began in late February. The Bank of Japan is expected to raise rates next week for the first time since December. In the United States, where prices are rising at their fastest pace in 3 years, the Federal Reserve will meet this next week. The Fed was not expected to change rates, but there are growing bets among investors that it will increase rates later in the year. For the past year, the ECB has held rates at 2%, a level intended to neither bolster nor restrict the economy, while Europe has been grappling with how to improve competitiveness and generate sustained growth. Policymakers expecting that to keep rates low would, in short term, support the economy through more consumer spending and business investment. Instead, the conflict in the Middle East quickly upended those expectations. Soaring energy prices added uncertainty and unpredictability. Economists weighing a range of increasingly adverse scenarios have started to predict sharply higher inflation, slower economic growth, and even recession. Still, the Eurozone economy has not shown signs of a repeat of 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine. Europe responded by cutting itself off from Russian gas, a critical energy supply, and inflation climbed into double digits. So far, traders aren't betting that it's the beginning of a long and aggressive cycle of rate increases, but they will be closely watching a news conference on Thursday by Christine Lagarde, the ECB president, for hints of what the central bank will do in the months ahead. Ahead of the meeting, traders were betting that by next spring rates will be 0.75 of a percentage point higher than they are now. The ECB is weighing higher inflation against signs of any economic slowdown caused by the war. Consumer confidence has plummeted and could weigh further on spending, while businesses and governments are diverting money to pay the higher costs of energy. The central bank is expected to lower its growth forecasts for this year and next. To some extent, slower growth could mitigate the pressure of higher prices. If consumers grow more nervous about spending, companies may find it harder to rise prices. At the same time, workers may not be able to push for higher wages if the labor markets weaken. That could stop inflation from rising as quickly or for as long. The prospect of a deeper slowdown has made some economists concerned that rate increases could be a mistake. They have raised comparisons to 2011, when the ECB, led by Jean-Claude Trichet, raised rates twice in the first half of the year, only to have Mario Draghi, Mr. Trichet's successor, cut rates a few months later. Frederick Dirkratz, head of the strategy and macro research at Pictet Wealth Management, said he did not believe it was necessary for the ECB to raise interest rates because he didn't see any signs of so-called second-round effects, in which higher energy costs lead to higher wages. The bigger issue, he said, is how officials communicate what will happen next. How hawkish will they be into a stagnating, if not contracting, economy, he added. That worries me more than this week's move. Okay, next article. The Knicks' comeback was epic. So was their fans' response. The crowd at Madison Square Garden was forlorn as the New York Knicks fell far behind in Game 4 of the NBA Finals. After they won, it was electric. The evening at Madison Square Garden began with a canceled party, a spat between New York City's mayor and the owner of the arena, and many, many missed shots by the New York Knicks. In other words, it looked like yet another disappointing chapter for the team's long-suffering fans. But after the Knicks rallied to secure the biggest comeback win in NBA Finals history, the director, Spike Lee, danced on the court while pop star Taylor Swift waved a Knicks towel in the air. On the nearby streets in Midtown Manhattan, roars filled the air, and some revelers stood on cars, food carts, and scaffolding. The Knicks are now one win away from delivering basketball glory to a city starved for a championship, and the party is back on. The day began ominously when James Dolan, the Knicks owner, escalated a dispute with Mayor Mamdani. In a radio interview, he blamed Mr. Mamdani and the police commissioner, Jessica Tisch, for heightened security around the arena. He canceled a watch party outside the garden, declining to use a permit granted by the city. And he defended President Trump, who had sat in the owner's suite 2 nights earlier and was ferociously booed when he appeared on the video screen. But in that same interview, Mr. Dolan promised victory in Game 4, Thursday night against the San Antonio Spurs, and in the finals. When the Spurs jumped out to what seemed like an insurmountable lead, Mr. Dolan's guarantee looked like a grave miscalculation. The Spurs couldn't miss. The Knicks couldn't stop them. Neither a video appearance from Ms. Swift, wearing a jacket that read Stevie Nicks, nor a halftime performance by the Wu-Tang Clan seemed to brighten the crowd's mood. But in the second half, fans roared with each moment that looked even remotely optimistic. Outside the arena, police wearing riot gear clashed with some New Yorkers who showed up to a party that didn't technically exist. The vibe is just hard to describe, Knicks coach Mike Brown said after the game. The energy in the crowd had a lot to do with our comeback. The madness crested in the final seconds as the Knicks tried to erase a 1-point deficit. After what appeared to be the team's final shot attempt bounced off the rim, Knicks forward OG Anunoby soared to tip it into the basket. The Spurs' final attempt failed. Outside the arena, a city jumped for joy. Along the Avenue A in the East Village, traffic was partially stopped near East 13th Street as revelers chanted Knicks in 5 and Go New York, Go New York, Go, the Knicks anthem. Passing garbage trucks and buses blared their horns, cheered on by hundreds of raptured fans. As someone who's not from New York, this is insane, Cara O'Donnell, a 24-year-old from Dublin, said. She photographed a throng of fans at an intersection near the Garden with an old school film camera. Some people climbed a truck in celebration. Next to the Union Street subway stop in Park Slope, Brooklyn, people who had gathered outside a Dominican restaurant craned their necks to watch the bar's TV from the sidewalk as the Knicks gained on the Spurs in the game's last minutes. When the final buzzer sounded, the explosion of energy from the crowd could be heard underground in the station. Just like that, a man cheered. For some fans at the Garden, total victory felt near. The Journey song, Don't Stop Believin', blared in the arena minutes after the final horn. A security guard directed fans towards the stairwell with a simple, confident farewell. Good night. See you at the parade. Okay, next article. One more article about the Knicks game last night. How a high-powered gathering turned into a Knicks watch party. An event for some of New York's elite shifted gears when a TV rolled into the bar. Caviar dollops and a smattering of high-powered guests were supposed to be the stars of a party on Wednesday night for a slice of New York's elite, who were celebrating a newsletter on culture capital. But like most things right now in New York, the Knicks nudged in and stole the show. Carson Griffith had planned the party for subscribers of her newsletter, Rich People Shit. But it seemed like that the event at a boutique hotel in Soho could coincide with a Knicks game in the NBA Finals in Madison Square Garden. Ms. Griffith freaked out, she said, upon learning of a scheduling conflict. Then she decided she would invite the Knicks to her party and on the big screen. But the hotel, which advertises its discreet, refined, generous sensibility, has no televisions, even in its guest rooms. Staff members initially thought the request of an impromptu Knicks watch party wasn't precisely on brand, said Rachel Harrison, a public relations specialist who helped organize the event. I told them, guys, this is a moment in time. This isn't an on-brand moment. This is a New York City moment, Ms. Harrison said. We've all put a lot of time into this party. If we can't do this, our entire high-powered guest list is going to leave. The hotel's staff relented. The guest list included finance and media executives, high-end realtors, and plastic surgeons. The author, Candace Bushnell, and Ashley St. Clair, the mother of one of Elon Musk's children, at least one former Real Housewife, among others, mingled and sipped specialty cocktails called Quiet Luxury and First Wife's Revenge. A number of them most likely could have afforded to attend the game being played simultaneously at the Garden, where ticket prices have soared to roughly the cost of a alligator skin Birkin bag. As the 8:30 p.m. tip-off time approached, the crowd thinned. A large television was rolled into the back of the bar, and a few people gathered to watch alongside a candlelit spread of red grapes and other appetizers. If you can't be inside Madison Square Garden, Ms. Harrison said, this is the only other place any person should be. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, next article. Mace's defeat heralds an exodus of rabble-rousers from Congress. The Republican Congresswoman from South Carolina, who made enemies on both sides of the political aisle, is just one of several flashy lawmakers to be leaving Capitol Hill. Few tears were shed on Capitol Hill on Wednesday for Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina, after she finished an embarrassing fifth in the Republican primary for governor. Thoughts and prayers, wrote Representative Sarah McBride of Delaware, the first openly transgender member of Congress, whom Ms. Mace tormented by barring her from using women's bathrooms on Capitol Hill. Many of her Republican colleagues shared the sentiment, though not publicly. After all, Ms. Mace, the shape-shifting, one-time moderate who made a full-blown turn toward Trumpism, had spent her 5 years on Capitol Hill performing one attention-grabbing stunt after another. She once paraded through the Capitol wearing a tight white tank top with a scarlet A emblemized over her chest, offending and alienating people in both parties along the way. Ms. Mace had one Trumpian view of politics that was immutable, and which has come to be shared by a certain set of her colleagues who quickly established themselves as flamboyant fixtures on Capitol Hill. That notoriety of any type can translate into power, and if people know your name and see your viral clips, they will believe you are important. Voters knew Miss Mace's name and unequivocally rejected her, but she was not the only House member who tried using the committee rooms and chamber floors as platforms for viral moments that could be transformed into huge followings on social media, fundraising dollars, and fame. Many of those showboats who proved to be naturals at this mode of politicking will be gone from the corridors of power in Washington next year, making the place possibly more functional, but also less colorful and noisy. Until a new crop of lawmakers finds its footing and takes up the attention-seeking mantle. Gone from under the dome next year will be Representative Jasmine Crockett, the firebrand Democrat from Texas, who famously coined the bleach blonde, bad-built body, butch body moniker for former Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia during a late night hearing of the Oversight Committee. The subject of the session was quickly lost into history amid the shock of two rabble-rousing congresswomen reveling in personal insults. Ms. Crockett lost the Democratic Senate primary earlier this year to James Tallarico. Ms. Greene, perhaps the biggest rabble-rouser of all, ejected herself from Congress early, resigning in January, days after Mr. Trump branded his former ally as a traitor for breaking with him and helping compel the Justice Department to release its files related to Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex offender. Ms. Greene could generate entire news cycles all by herself, both when she was a diehard mega loyalist trafficking in conspiracy theories, and later, after she broke hard and permanently with Mr. Trump over a variety of issues. In her later, arguably more mature iteration, Ms. Greene said she regretted believing some of the QAnon conspiracy theories she once echoed, stating on the House floor that school shootings are absolutely real and that the 9/11 attacks absolutely happened. Gone, too, will be a Representative Al Green, Democrat of Texas, the outspoken, cane-waving septagon who twice got booted from presidential addresses at the Capitol for shouting and waving unapproved signs. After losing his Democratic primary earlier this month, Mr. Green will no longer be around to file articles of impeachment against President Trump, as he has done repeatedly, prompting eye rolls among colleagues who generally viewed them as an unhelpful distraction. And the State of the Union address will be missing one of its more reliable hecklers. Representative Chip Roy, Republican of Texas, who shouted floor speeches criticizing members of his own party and a Congress as a whole, made for delicious clips for cable news viewers who enjoy lapping up Republican on Republican violence, also lost his statewide race for Attorney General last month. And with that, the Republican conference will lose one of its most maddening holdouts on key votes, and reporters will be deprived of one of the more reliable quote generators who routinely says the quiet part out loud. At some point, people will look at this body and say maybe we should get rid of all 435 members of the House and all 100 members of the Senate and start over because Congress is literally failing the American people, Mr. Roy said earlier this year. Clipped and saved. Then there were those who stood out for different reasons, but still enjoyed basking in the spotlight, and whose departures will leave a gaping hole in the fabric of Congress. Representative Thomas Massie, Republican of Kentucky, the raw, milk-guzzling libertarian who wears a digital federal debt clock he made himself on his lapel, won't be returning to Washington next year after he lost his primary to a Trump-backed challenger. Unlike Ms. Mace, Mr. Massie generally attracted attention because he was the rare Republican with a core set of beliefs on which he would not compromise, regardless of the political consequences. That ultimately caught up with him. The House will still have its fair share of flashy personalities. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of the New York Democrat and progressive standout is expected to easily win re-election in November and return next year amid speculation about whether she will seek a Senate seat or have a go at the presidency. Despite being a new target of Mr. Trump's ire, Representative Lauren Boebert of the Colorado Republican, who was caught on a security camera in 2023 vaping and groping her date during a performance of the musical Beetlejuice, is seen as relatively safe in her re-election campaign, barring an upset. And those who are gone are likely to simply look elsewhere for a platform where they can continue vying for attention. Ms. Green, for instance, earlier this week announced a new online series, Life with MTG, which is expected to include political conversations and lifestyle segments. Ms. Mace was already back online on Wednesday morning, acknowledging her defeat and jumping into the next fight, this time with Graham Plattner, the embattled Democratic nominee for Senate in Maine, who, if he wins, could help fill the charter void on the Hill. Enjoying my first cup of coffee since getting my ass kicked last night, Ms. Mace wrote on social media, and reading about how Dems nominated the guy with the Nazi tattoo. Okay, next article. This is from the opinion section. An article written by E.J. Dionne Jr. Republicans thought they owned values. Not anymore. The values voter became a hot political commodity some 2 decades ago, a catchy rebranding of the religious right. The label was inspired by a controversial exit poll question in the 2004 presidential election, finding that 22% of voters cast their ballots on the basis of moral values, and 80% of them supported George W. Bush. The assumption took hold that Americans who cared about values were conservatives animated by opposition to abortion and same-sex marriage. The 2026 campaign is reminding us that this narrow view of how voters think about values is out of step with a long American tradition that gave rise to moral appeals for improving society as a whole, particularly at times of great economic and technological change. We are witnessing the return of a politics of morality organized around the injustices of the economic system and an array of related problems. The cost of technological change, the unraveling of community, civil rights, and financial and work balances issued confronting families. These themes are powerful in the campaigns of Democrats this year across the party's philosophical spectrum, and it's about time. In his 2022 History of the Democratic Party, What It Took to Win, the Georgetown professor Michael Kazin argues that the most fruitful strategy for Democrats over time has involved criticizing the failures of the status quo in the name of an alternative morale capitalism. The underlying causes of the country's unease speaking to the demand for a larger moral argument. The rapid development of artificial intelligence raises big questions about the future of work and the nature of being human that have begun to seep into conversations at dinner tables, taverns, and over back fences. Early in his searching on AI, Pope Leo offered a query that is on many minds. Where are we going? Moral engagement with the economy, social justice, and technological revolution has deep American roots, both secular and religious. At the high tide of the progressive era, Walter Rauschenbaum, a Protestant pastor and theologian, gave voice to the social gossip movement in his 1907 book, Christianity and the Social Crisis. The civil rights movement of the middle of the 20th century, like the abolitionist movement before it, highlighted the moral urgency of equal rights and linked their defense to religious values. This tradition has been kept alive by religious progressives and the Black Church. In 2026, the resurgence of a Christian left is most explicit in James Tallarico's Senate campaign in Texas. Mr. Tallarico, a Presbyterian Samaritan, speaks often about his faith and regularly involves Scripture. He is inspired by Jesus' overturning of the money changers' table outside the temple, described in all four Gospels. The top of his campaign website features Mr. Tallarico's signature line, "It's time to start flipping tables." His campaign against the Republican nominee, Ken Paxton, will provide the starkest contest between the old values debate and the new one. Mr. Paxton has denounced Mr. Tallarico's theology and issued similar attacks from the religious right, notably around trans issues. The scandalous personal baggage weighing down Mr. Paxton will complicate his talk about morality, but it won't stop him from using it to appeal to the remnant of the old values voters who helped Mr. Trump win in 2024. Mr. Tallarico is far and alone among Democrats in thundering against the Trump administration policies in biblical terms. The list of possible 2028 presidential contenders who make religiously inflected arguments for social change is long. It includes both of Georgia's senators, Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. Mr. Warnock is a Baptist minister. Former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, and increasingly Governor Gavin Newsom of California. In September, Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky will push a book about faith, Go and Do Likewise, with a title and message inspired by the parable of the Good Samaritan. President Trump's corruption and self-dealing have provided a new foundation for arguments inflected by appeals to values. The president's close and often rumorative ties to some of the nation's wealthiest individuals and interests lead naturally to a broader assault of oligarchy, a word popularized from the left by Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but now in common use across the party. The closest thing to a manifesto for the Democrats' new values offensive is Senator Chris Murphy's book published last month, Crisis of the Common Good, The Fight for Meaning and Connection in a Broken America. Mr. Murphy, a Connecticut Democrat, links a left populist critique of the economy with the imperative of responding to America's spiritual unraveling. Defeating Mr. Trump is necessary, Mr. Murphy argues, but the president's rise is also a symptom. A deeper rot festers in the American soul. Its elements, he writes, includes a callousness toward our neighbors and a me-first selfishness, along with what he sees as the worship of fault cults, among them profit at any cost, consumerism instead of citizenship, and a blind faith in technology. The Democrats' new moral language suggests an understanding that the backward-looking again in Mr. Trump's mega slogan was about more than a return to reactionary approaches to race and immigration. It also spoke to many who yearned for, as Mr. Murphy put it, a time when Americans felt more connected to community and neighbor. Former Governor Roy Cooper, a Democrat battling for a Senate seat in North Carolina, is one candidate who has translated these larger ideas into the shorthand of the political spot, narrating an ad about his childhood on a family farm. I grew up working on this farm, Mr. Cooper said. Mom was a teacher, Dad a small-town lawyer and farmer. Fridays were football. Sunday was church. I'm Roy Cooper. Life felt easier back then. I'm running for the Senate to make life easier today, to go after insurance companies ripping you off, to make sure you can retire with dignity, and to build an economy that finally values working people. In a different key, Mr. Ossoff, who is the only Democratic senator up for re-election in a state Mr. Trump carried in 2024, called down the judgment of the prophet Amos as he addressed the political and moral crisis that we face in our nation. At Elizabeth Baptist Church in Atlanta last month, Amos attacked the moral corruption of his time, Mr. Ossoff declared, adding that the people struggled to survive while the wealthy and the powerful lived in luxury and opulence. Americans have quarreled over prohibition, birth control, abortion, sexuality, and other aspects of individual behavior. But we have also confronted the corruption of political and economic systems and our responsibilities to put things right. We are in a transition in how we talk about values because now is a moment to tend to the demands of our common life and our obligation to one another. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, next article. How Tesla's stock listing in 2010 enabled SpaceX's IPO. Investors who bought the automaker's shares in its initial public offering became rich. As a result, many have a deep faith in Elon Musk, the chief executive of Tesla and SpaceX. Tesla had sold barely 1,000 cars when the company's chief executive, an up-and-coming entrepreneur named Elon Musk, rang the opening bell at NASDAQ in June of 2010. The initial public offering valued Tesla at $1.7 billion, even though the company's only product was its two-seated Roadster, which had a starting price of $100,000 and took 7 hours to charge. Some prominent Wall Street figures were deeply skeptical. Tesla is a sell, 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 Jim Cramer, the CNBC host, told viewers. You don't want to own this stock. Tesla and Mr. Musk have come a long way. Now he is asking investors to value SpaceX, where he is also chief executive, at $1.77 trillion, or more than 1,000 times what Tesla was worth in 2010. The SpaceX listing is expected to raise $75 billion for the company. Tesla's listing raised $226 million, far less than it had received in federal government loans. Mr. Musk is much better known than he was in 2010 as the world's richest man. He has become a lightning rod for anti-billionaire sentiment. He owns the social media site X, which he uses to broadcast right-wing political views. But the Tesla stock listing and its share price's stunning rise in the recent years helped create an aura of mystique around Mr. Musk. To his many admirers on Wall Street and Silicon Valley, he is a genius who has made loyal investors insanely wealthy while disrupting the auto industry and spaceflight. An investor who bought 1,000 Tesla shares in 2010 at the initial offering price of $17 and held the shares until now would have made a profit of more than $5.8 million. That spectacular return has enabled SpaceX's massive valuation, said Michael Lennox, interim dean of the Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia. In Elon we trust, Mr. Lennox said, summarizing the view of Mr. Musk among his admirers. He has created these successful businesses. This is what the market is looking at. Even in 2010, Mr. Musk displayed brashness and a talent for winning over investors. Parrying criticism from Mr. Cramer, Mr. Musk reminded viewers that the Wall Street guru had also recommended buying shares in Bear Stearns before the Wall Street bank collapsed during the financial crisis. Mr. Cramer, Mr. Musk said with a smirk during an interview on CNBC, was a contraindicator. The smartest move in the world is betting on Tesla, he told Bloomberg in another interview without naming any investors. They must have some reason. Mr. Cramer was not completely wrong. Tesla shares languished for almost a decade, trading below the offering price well into 2019. They started taking off after the company's Model 3 began to sell in significant numbers. Mr. Cramer later changed his mind about the fledgling car maker, which became the largest manufacturer of electric vehicles until BYD of China overtook it last year. Tesla was a highly speculative company when it came public, and I was skeptical, he said this week in a statement to the New York Times. As the company proved it could execute and the facts changed, my view changed. In 2010, it was by no means certain that Tesla's stock would be successful. Inside the company, employees were anxious, said Kurt Kelty, who was Tesla's senior director of battery technology. What's going to happen with the price of the stock once it goes public? He said they had wondered. Are we going to tank on the first day? Are we going to take off like a rocket? Matteo Jaramillo, who worked on Tesla's electronic propulsion system at the time, said he and other workers had been too busy to spend much time celebrating. Maybe we took an hour or two to acknowledge the event, and then it was right back to work, he said. Tesla employees had stock options, but at the time, those didn't seem much more valuable than the bottles of Roadster red wine they had received as a memento of the stock market listing. We all believed in the company, or we wouldn't have been there, said Mr. Jaramillo, now chief executive of Form Energy, a company that makes large energy storage systems. But none of us went there with the expectation that it was going to be a wealth-creating sort of endeavor. It was an inauspicious time for the auto industry. General Motors was emerging from bankruptcy, and Ford Motor was selling Volvo at a loss after selling Jaguar Land Rover. There was effectively no market for electric vehicles. The Model S sedan, Tesla's first mass production car, would not hit the road for another 2 years. There were still a lot of questions about electric cars and whether they were viable, said Mr. Lennox, whose research at the University of Michigan focuses on technology firms. Mr. Musk won over investors by portraying Tesla as a Silicon Valley startup with huge growth potential, the opposite of the plodding, century-old Detroit car makers. We operate in a fundamentally different manner and structure than traditional automobile manufacturers, Tesla's 2010 prospectus had said. Mr. Musk is still telling shareholders that Tesla is much more than a car company. Now he argues that it will dominate the market for self-driving taxis and humanoid robots, untested technologies that are not generating much revenue. Enough investors buy that premise to give Tesla a stock market valuation of $1.4 trillion, many times the valuation of GM and Ford. He has also been pitching SpaceX as more than just a rocket company or a provider of satellite internet service. It will also build orbiting data centers to power xAI, its artificial intelligence unit, and lead humanity to Mars, he has said. SpaceX's mission is to build the systems and technologies necessary to make life multiplanetary, to understand the true nature of the universe, and to extend the light of consciousness to the stars, the company has said in investor presentations. Nobody can say with a certainty how SpaceX's stock will perform or whether it will follow the trajectory of Tesla shares. Even executives who spent years at the automaker acknowledged that they had failed to anticipate its rise. Who would have known how high the stock has gone? Mr. Kelty, now vice president in charge of batteries at GM, said about Tesla's shares. He added, "I wish I'd hung on to mine." Okay, next article. Medical cure or designer baby? A new approach to editing embryos ignites debate. Fertility specialists, biotech companies, and ethicists are divided over whether progressive in early gene editing would wipe out diseases or trigger a rush toward enhancement. When scientists at Columbia University announced that they had used a newer technology to precisely edit the genes of human embryos last week, they set the academic community ablaze with debate. Is this good news or bad? How fast would this move? And more philosophically, where does medicine end and eugenetics begin? The results of the new study, first reported by the New York Times, showed that a technique called base editing meticulously swapped out individual letters in an embryo's genome, altering genes linked to fetal hemoglobin production, cholesterol levels, and the risk of heart disease. Though the work is still under peer review and has not yet been published in a scientific journal, experts from a vast array of disciplines are discussing whether the tool will bring us one step closer to curing inherent diseases or one step closer to designer babies, or both. Optimistic clinicians saw the Columbia study as a major step in medicine, bolstering their hope that scientists could one day fix embryo mutations in a clinical setting. Dr. Ellen Goldstein, a reproductive endocrinologist and fertility specialist in Los Angeles, said that for some of her patients, the tool could mean a successful pregnancy with an embryo that would have otherwise been discarded. There are very specific problems that this technology could be applied to, conditions where we all agree there are devastating consequences, she said, like Huntington's disease, which causes nerve cells in the brain to break down, or Duchenne muscular dystrophy, in which skeletal and heart muscles waste away. As a doctor, you wish you could just go in and start fixing embryos, she said. Tweaking embryos with an earlier form of gene editing, CRISPR, is considered far too risky. The tool functions like a pair of molecular scissors, hacking off long segments of DNA, sometimes in error. Researchers who tried it found their specimens with strange DNA rearrangements, large swaths missing, and in some cases entire chromosomes destroyed. Base editing is not nearly as clunky. The Columbia researchers were, in many cases, able to change single letters of the genome safely, as if they had a precision eraser and a red pencil to simply correct the spelling. For proponents of the new tool, the argument is, if we could safely prevent a child from inheriting or a devastating genetic condition, isn't it ethical? Isn't it unethical not to? We have to be really careful not to have knee-jerk reactions to reject this kind of research, Dr. Goldstein said. As long as you're doing it with proper understanding and proper respects for the future implications and with correct oversight from biologists and ethics. Many of those ethics are the ones in issuing caution. Dr. Lainey Friedman Ross, a pediatrician and biotechist at the University of Rochester, was skeptical not just of the future implications of the technology, but of the present-day work. Let us be clear, she said, human embryos become living human persons. The research is being done on future persons without their consent. The researcher who led the project, Dieter Egli, told the Times that a public conversation about the pros and cons of editing genes in embryos was necessary, but that as a scientist, you can provide the data for discussion, but then essentially there you stop and let others take over. Dr. Ross vehemently disagreed. This is morally irresponsible. There is no such thing as value natural science, she said. The team has already made an ethical decision to pursue this line of work. Genetists, too, are tempering their excitement, they're tempering their excitement, arguing that the technology still has major limitations. The tweaks, though precise, only worked in a portion of the cells, which resulted in so-called mosaic embryos that contained a mix of edited and unedited cells. in one of the mosaic embryos had been implanted and led to a pregnancy. The health implications of the mix might not have become apparent for years after the child's birth. Another clinical complexity. Since modern IVF usually extracts a small cluster of cells from genetic testing, the mosaic nature of an embryo could easily be missed. If the randomly selected pocket is healthy, it could offer parents false reassurances, masking the mutation elsewhere. We are very far away from having safe embryonic gene editing methods where the benefits outweigh the risks, said Rasmus Nielsen, a geneticist at the University of California, Berkeley. Early embryo editing also comes with a sobering level of permanence. Unlike edits to standard body cells, any changes made to reproduce cells are passed down to future generations. That means edits or errors in a clinical setting wouldn't end with that child, but would be passed down their family line, altering the gene pool forever. How would we as a society intervene if the intervention led to serious health or reproductive consequences? We have no strategy, Dr. Ross said. This can have dire consequences for our species. Despite the risk, many experts expect a substantial commercial push, not just to make this technology available, but also to encourage it. The chief clinical officer of Nuclear Genomics was an author of the new paper, and the company announced it was proud to fund the next phase of research focused on further advancing this technology towards clinical use. At a booming moment of reproductive technology, and one at which nucleus is among the companies at the center, some researchers worry that the initial concept of editing away diseases will quickly be repurposed into a Silicon Valley push to optimize the human genome, promising wealthy parents to chance the edit for elective traits like eye color and height. Many of the eugenic traits that biologists worry the most about, like intelligence, rely on hundreds of thousands of genes that interact with one another and a child's environment. Thus, it's highly unlikely that one by one base editing would be useful. But that doesn't mean companies would not capitalize on parents' hopes and fears. Given the lack of regulation about reproductive technologies, said Daphne Osweiler, a bioethicist at Stanford University, it feels like only a matter of time. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 11th issue of the New York Times. Your reader today has been Mark Grier. Thank you so much for listening.